I'll give you a brief introduction to all the speakers that you're going to be hearing in this first section of the webinar. So we're first going to have Peter Rosset, who is an internationally renowned expert on food security, peasant movements, food and development. He's a professor at the College of Frontera Sur, Ecosur, in Federal Research and Graduate Studies Institute in Chiapas. And he's the author of many books, including most recently, Agroecology, Science and Politics. Peter's going to present a global geopolitical analysis of the context within which Sembrando Vida is operating, looking at climate change, international politics, and the ongoing war against shifting cultivation and migration in the global south. Rosa López Valentin is an engineer in agroecology with a wealth of experience in working within and alongside peasant communities in grassroots agroecological projects across Mexico, most recently focusing on the south states of Mexico. In today's session, she's going to explain how Sembrando Vida works in comparison to traditional agroecological approaches and the technicalities of implementing the program on the ground. Finally, Omar Felipe Giraldo, a professor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, does research in political ecology and environmental philosophy. He received the 2021 Research Award in Social Sciences from the Mexican Academy of Sciences, and he'll talk about Sembrando Vida in the wider context of the Mexican government development agenda, particularly the mega projects that characterize this. So we're going to have about 15 minutes per speaker, and then we'll have all the questions at the end. So if you think of any questions you'd like to ask any speakers, just jot them down, and we'll take those at the end of the first session before moving on to La Via Campesina. So I'll now pass over to Peter without further ado. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Emma. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my screen now. Very good. So this is the webinar on understanding Sembrando Vida, the governmental program in Mexico that inspired the COP agreement on reforestation. Sembrando Vida in English is planting life, and we'll be using those two names interchangeably, Sembrando Vida and planting life. But you can see that the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forest and Land Use was one of the major results of the COP26 climate summit that just took place in Glasgow, Scotland. And this declaration on forests is based on the Mexican government social program and environmental program called Sembrando Vida or Planting Life, which is, the idea is that it should be the model for programs to address forest and reforestation issues related to climate change in other countries around the world. So we need to see this Glasgow COP declaration on forests and the Mexican model, Sembrando Vida or Planting Life, in context, in perspective. And the context that we have to see it in, I've listed 6 elements of context. One is the track record of global climate negotiations and agreements so far. So we're on COP26. That means there were 25 COPs before. What has happened from those previous rounds of negotiations? Number 2, the climate crisis and so-called agroecological solutions, because this Mexican model, Sembrando Vida or Planting Life, is at least partially based on agroecology. We also need to see it in the context of the migration crisis, because this model is also proposed to address the migration crisis. But in a more long-term, long history sense, this Planting Life or Sembrando Vida program in Mexico is related to the issue around the world for many years of shifting cultivation or shifting cultivators, what we call agricultura itinerante in Spanish. And this is very important because if this policy is to be globalized around the global south, most countries in the global south have significant areas under shifting cultivation, as does Mexico. We also need to see it in the context of the global capitalist economy and its expression in rural territories. We'll see that in the case of Mexico in this webinar. And national programs obey national politics. And so we need to understand Sembrando Vida or Planting Life in the context of Mexican internal politics, including electoral politics, the question of large-scale infrastructure projects, and ongoing resistance in rural territories by indigenous peasants, resistance to all kinds of capitalist appropriation of their territories. So let's go through these one point at a time. So in terms of the track record of global climate negotiations and agreements related to the climate crisis and so-called agroecological solutions, I suggest that we look at what La Via Campesina has said, because La Via Campesina is the largest social movement in the world. It's a co-sponsor of this webinar. We'll be hearing leaders from Via Campesina Mexico, and Via Campesina is the most important source for issues related to peasants, climate change, and agroecology. So what La Via Campesina has been saying is that peasant farmers are the segment of the population in any country most affected by direct climate change, by global warming, changing temperatures, changing rainfall patterns, all of which affect their crops and their livestock and planting dates. Peasants are also affected by what La Via Campesina calls false solutions to climate change, and I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. And they also say that on the other hand, on the positive side, peasant agriculture, peasant seeds, peasant agroecology, and the peasant proposal of food sovereignty is where we could find real solutions to climate change. And La Via Campesina has also said over the long history now of these climate negotiations that governments have only been meeting in COP climate summits to traffic in the false solutions with the private sector, with corporations, way to make money by giving a green veneer to capitalist enterprise without really looking for true solutions. La Via Campesina says that food sovereignty would be a true solution to climate change. So what are these false solutions that La Via Campesina and other activists have been complaining about? Please turn off your microphones. Apagan sus micrófonos, por favor. These false solutions from previous summits have been the whole red carbon credit system with offset payments for carbon sequestration, which basically means that polluting industries in the north can pay a nominal amount of money for somebody to plant some trees in the south and continue polluting. Obviously, that doesn't address climate change. Agrofuels or biofuels, have cars run on ethanol that comes from sugarcane or trucks on biodiesel that comes from soybeans, so as not to use petroleum. But it turns out that more greenhouse gas emissions are released into the atmosphere from producing the ethanol or the biodiesel than would be used from the petroleum products. So it's also a false solution to climate change. We've also seen as false solutions GMO seeds, so-called climate smart agriculture, the so-called green economy or green capitalism, which is just painting capitalism green without making any real change. And what we're seeing now in a number of countries, which are public policies that we might say are based on fake agroecology instead of real agroecology. And we'll get to that more as well. So what would be real solutions? Myself as an agroecology academic, researcher, and also Via Campesina as a social movement, feel that real mitigation of climate change could come from peasant agriculture and relocalized food systems through food sovereignty and peasant agroecology. Peasant agroecology would eliminate greenhouse gas emissions that come from agrochemicals and would actually sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Small scale production, peasant production, also reduces emissions from farm machinery. Peasants use less machines or smaller machines. More local or at least national production under food sovereignty would reduce the significant amount of climate emissions that come from long distance transport. And another part of climate emissions come from forest clearing, and traditional communities, peasant communities, indigenous people defend the forests and their territories, which also reduces emissions. So these are the different kind of emissions that come from the food system, and the food system produces from 30 to 60% of all greenhouse gas emissions or climate change. So these solutions that La Via Campesina proposes could actually do real mitigation of climate change. And not only that, but peasant agriculture and agroecology is adaptive, offers adaptation to climate change. The genetic diversity of peasant seeds allows crop varieties to evolve along with a changing climate. Commercial seeds are genetically uniform and cannot evolve with a changing climate. When temperatures rise, agroecology, peasant agroecology uses shade trees, cover crops, and mulch to lower soil temperature. And when farming regions become more arid, agroecology uses more organic matter in the soil to hold water and also uses water harvesting practices. So peasant agroecology could be real mitigation and real adaptation. Via Campesina has marched at many COP climate summits in the past, protesting the false solutions and proposing the real solutions. Now, in the particular case of the Sembrando Vida or Planting Life program, which is now proposed from Glasgow, from COP26 as a global model, it's also proposed as addressing the migration crisis. Essentially, what the Mexican government has been saying to the US government is that by paying peasants to plant trees, essentially we would be planting migrants and they wouldn't migrate. And that this is one reason why the US government has agreed with the Mexican government to provide United States funding to Central America to extend this program from Mexico to Central America. There's the president of El Salvador together with the president of Mexico. Now, this program of Sembrando Vida, of Planting Life, is also related to this issue of shifting cultivation or agricultura itinerante around the world. And that is related in turn to the global capitalist economy and its expression in rural territories. Shifting cultivation is also called rotational agriculture, swidden farming, or in a negative way, sometimes is called slash and burn. But this book that you see in the picture, the Maya Forest Garden, a very good anthropological and archaeological study of long-term peasant agriculture, shifting cultivation in Mexico, shows that the traditional system of shifting cultivation has been sustainable for 8,000 years. And actually most of the forest in Mexico and Mesoamerica is not a natural forest, that there's no such thing as a pristine natural forest. Rather, the forest has been cultivated by indigenous people for 8,000 years in a very sustainable way. And shifting cultivation is practiced around the world, all over tropical and subtropical areas, as you can see in this map. There's something in the Thai language. I'm actually in Thailand right now, and shifting cultivation is a major agricultural practice and political issue in Thailand as well. This slide that comes from Álvaro Salgado of Via Campesina Mexico shows a typical system. Shifting cultivation is about a 15-year cycle in which peasants move from areas under temporary annual cropping, the milpa polyculture system in the case of Mexico, then through stages of managed forest regrowth or fallow. And then after the cycle completes, there's fully regenerated forest again. And all of this is under communal land management practices. And so this is the traditional system that we have to keep in mind as the context in which the Sembrando Vida or Planting Life model is being proposed. Now, with shifting cultivation, there are approximately 2 billion hectares around the world, 30% of the world's arable land, as much as half in the tropics. And in Mexico, about 30% of arable land, or 6 million hectares, is under shifting cultivation by indigenous peasants. We can see similarities between Thailand, Mexico, and many other countries in terms of this kind of agriculture. Shifting cultivation has been criticized by governments and by the World Bank for decades, mostly mythological criticisms saying that it's technologically primitive, inefficient, wasteful, that peasants destroy forests and soils, that it's unsustainable. None of this is actually true, because ecological and anthropological research has showed that shifting cultivation is actually highly sustainable, guarantees managed forest regeneration, a good livelihood strategy for traditional peoples, is actually very productive, and is attuned to the culture and spirituality of indigenous peasant people. Yet, shifting cultivation for many years has been criminalized. Shifting cultivators have faced forced sedentarism, forced relocation, crop substitution, market incentives to move to monoculture, government incentives to sedentarize around the world. So why are governments maintaining these myths about shifting cultivation and trying to reduce it or compact it to a smaller area? It could be because shifting cultivation allows indigenous and traditional peoples to exert land claims over very large areas. And therefore, having large areas under shifting cultivation frustrates capital in its attempts to appropriate territory. And I think we have to think about that when we look at this model and how it's played out in Mexico. Now, over the long history of shifting cultivation around the world, we can say that governments have carried out a long war against shifting cultivators. These are scenes from Southeast Asia of criminalization, forced sedentarism, forced relocation. And we can see in the case of Latin America, the historical process over 500 years, when the Spanish and Portuguese conquest or colonization came, they applied what were called the reductions, because the Spanish, the Portuguese came, they wanted to colonize, they wanted to have plantations, but where were they going to have their plantations if all of the land was already being used by indigenous people under shifting cultivation, which uses a lot of land? So they forcibly reduced the area, forcibly by force of arms, that indigenous people had access to, and these were called the reductions. And these reductions have gone on for 500 years over Latin America. Now, in that context of reductions, how can we see this new Mexican policy of Sembrando Vida, or planting life, which according to the president of Mexico is the largest reforestation program in the world? Sembrando Vida is a policy pitched as or put forth as reforestation, as agroforestry and agroecology, as stopping climate change, as stopping migration, as green solutions to all of these problems. It's the largest social program of the Mexican government. It pays people $250 a month to reduce their area, their typically large area of shifting cultivation, to a small area of just 2.5 hectares. So instead of the reductions of the Spanish conquest, where they were reduced by force of arms, here they would be being paid to do a reduction. They would plant trees and do agroecology, agroforestry systems on those 2.5 hectares. But by reducing their area to those 2.5 hectares, they have to remove their farm plots from communal management and from the authority of the village or ejido assembly and leaders, essentially individualize or privatize that small plot of land. And then they come under the absolute authority and discipline of government technical staff. In other words, the technical staff will now tell them what tree to plant, what crop to plant, what distance between plants. And if they don't comply with the exact instructions, there's a system of punishment in which essentially their payment and other things are at risk if they don't comply. And so in this sense, they would be told to no longer use their larger area, no longer have their area communally managed, and no longer use their traditional knowledge and practices. Instead of using their traditional knowledge and practices, they should follow the instructions of government technical staff. So in terms of this slide from Álvaro Salgado, each family should give up its communal rotational management. It should just plant one small individual permanent plot of land. And so you can see here schematically how this would be a reduction, a new form of reduction of indigenous shifting cultivation. So is this the new reduction, paying people to reduce themselves $250 a month instead of doing it by force of arms? And would this free land from peasant land claims and open it up for capitalist exploitation? Parks for tourism, commercial forestry, agribusiness, mining, large-scale infrastructure. These are all questions that have to be asked. And in terms of Mexican internal politics, and this is my last slide, there are a number of concerns. I'll just list them because the other speakers will go into them a little bit in more depth, but there are technical criticisms. Because the program is designed by technical staff and not by peasants, sometimes they're told to plant the wrong trees, or there's the imposition of the wrong farming practices, or the trees don't arrive in time, or a common problem where because it's a reforestation program, people can't have trees to join the program, so people have been deforesting in order to join the program. And there are questions what happens when the government changes. But there are also questions about possible, political questions about possible hidden objectives of the program. Is it really a program, yet another program across the long history of shifting cultivation to sedentarize and reduce shifting cultivators? Is it a way to destructure communal land management and communal land governance? Is it counterinsurgency against the Zapatistas because people would be paid and no longer and be lured out of autonomy? Could it be to neutralize resistance to large-scale infrastructure projects? Could it be to create political clientele and buy votes, that people will be told if you vote for another government, you won't get your $250 anymore? Could it be greenwashing and social washing of policy, planting migrants, financialization of poverty because the payments go through a private bank so far who can spin that money around in financial speculation? And could it be to proletarianize the peasantry by preparing them and disciplining them to join the labor force because they have to learn to follow instructions from technical staff? And these are all concerns about this program that our various speakers will be delving into. And these are things to think about if through the COP declaration, this program becomes the global model to be implemented in countries around the global south, with a large finance fund to be created and funded by wealthy countries around the world. So we need to look at Sembrando Vida, or Planting Life in Mexico, before we celebrate necessarily the globalization of this policy as a result of the COP Climate Summit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was very interesting. We're now going to pass on to Rosa, who's going to talk about the contrast between indigenous peasant agriculture and traditional peasant agroecology and the Sembrando Vida. For those of you that are listening in English, I think Rosa's going to speak in Spanish, so you will have to go onto the English interpretation channel. So I'm looking forward to your talk, Rosa.
We're waiting for Rosa to begin her talk, which will be in Spanish. So I will be translating to English.
Is she here? Maybe if she's lost connection. Here she is. Thank you, Rosa.
Voy a compartir mi pantalla.
I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can see it.
¿La ven?
Do you see it?
Sí. Hola. Okay. Bueno, yo les voy a hablar de programa.
I'm going to speak of the Sembrando Vida technical interruption. We're waiting to see her PowerPoint.
¿Ahora ya?
No vemos tu pantalla.
No, we still don't see her PowerPoint screen.
¿Ahora ya?
Ahora sí.
Now we see it.
Bueno, buenos días a todos y todas.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share with you a bit of the impacts that we've observed in the field of Sembrando Vida and the differences with agroecology. Or I say agroecologies because they're diverse. So what does Sembrando Vida propose? It seeks to attend to rural poverty and environmental degradation. So it has 4 objectives: productive inclusion, caring for environment, fomenting the culture of savings, and reconstructing the social structure. So these are the 4 components. 20, it's being proposed in 20 states of Mexico, in many locations. We're waiting for her to change it to a presentation. Now she has it.
Ahí, a ver, ¿ya?
No.
Es que aquí está en presentación de verdad.
Okay, now it's in presentation.
Vamos aquí. Aquí la voy a ir moviendo. Entonces, ¿qué propone el programa Sembrando Vida?
So what does Sembrando Vida propose?
Sus objetivos son rescatar el campo.
Its objectives are to recover rural areas, environmental conservation, savings, and reconstructing the social fabric. It's in 20 states of Mexico. 70% of participants are men and almost 30% women. You can see here the 20 states. It's in most of the southeast of Mexico and part of the northern part of Mexico. The requirements, you have to be an agrarian subject below the rural poverty level and live in a rural area, according to the indexes that the government established. You have to be over age 18, and you have to have 2.5 hectares individually held to work in an agroforestry project. These 2.5 hectares individually held is very important because those who don't hold land through communal assemblies can establish a contract of possession at least until 2024. The land that are going to be put into the program have to be milpa corn, diversified cornfields, or unused land, or fallows to be able to join the program. So the money that is sent to the beneficiaries, the agrarian subjects, as they say, it's 5,000 Mexican pesos, of which 450 goes into a savings account, and 50 pesos goes into a well-being fund. And finally, the agrarian subjects or beneficiaries, planters, receive 4,500 pesos. The exchange rate is about 20 pesos to one US dollar. So they receive the necessary plants, supposedly according to the region. The amount of plants is defined according to the program. Also, they receive inputs, tools to be able to carry out the work. And they establish nurseries to produce 50,000 plants per year. These should be attended by the beneficiaries with the accompaniment of the technical advisors. The structure of the program, from my perspective, I think it's reproducing verticalism. There are regional and territorial coordinators, productive agricultural and social specialists, communal facilitators, social technical advisors. And there are also scholarship recipients, young scholarship recipients that are there with a government program. So 25 people organize into a community of learning, as they call it. They're accompanied by agricultural technician and a social technical advisor, and 3 scholarship recipients, young scholarship recipients. That's how it's organized. That is how it works in general. So we've been reviewing, observing in the field, that there's aspects of planning, monitoring, and evaluation that show the power of decision making of the technical advisors. In the end, the technical advisors are making the decisions because they're accompanying the process of decision making in choosing the plot where they're going to work and management. So they have a lot of decision making power. Seems to me that the technical advisors, the technical have more decision-making power than the social advisors. The objective of the social advisor is to weave the social fabric within the community of learning, because they work with these 25 people. We've also seen that the indicators of evaluation in response to the objectives are often limited to measuring how many trees are planted, how many have survived, and leaving aside development of the social fabric. They're not paying attention to that. So if they're just evaluated by how many workshops they carry out, how can we measure what's happening to the social fabric? So I think it's important to look at this verticality within the team to avoid this social technician from being abandoned, that the work of these people is very important and is not taken account through the indicators. So in these communities of learning, we've realized that in communities participating in Sembrando Vida, the program, a lot of organizations were already organized, and there was experiences, and there were communities that were already recovering native forest species that were getting lost, and these weren't taken into account. Some of them wanted to be part, some of them wanted to be part of this process because they had species that were adapted to the locations, to the local areas, and they weren't taken into account. So these communities of learning in relation to the community organization is being excluded, apparently. The power of the technical advisor and the demands of the project, they have to meet at least 2 times a month. And we've seen that they tend to have 2 meetings a year, not meeting their objectives. So this demand on their time for these communities of learning make people not participate in community activities. And this destructures the community life. So this has to be taken into account. Something else we observed is that the diversity among the technical advisors. Some have a more productivist orientation, some more agroecological or social vision. And so all of this diversity among technical advisors makes the program so diverse. And it's confronted with they're confronted with a list of requisites or objectives that they have to achieve. So we think this limits the possibility of scaling up this plan to being a more communitarian plan. Another thing that we found is land use is being changed and environmental degradation is increasing. A study carried out by carried out in 2021 shows that there was deforestation of, she mentioned a large number, thousands of hectares. You can see the link on the bottom there. And this is so that people can have those 2.5 hectares to join the program. So if they're deforesting to join the program, how are they changing the landscape? If we cut down forest and then we establish a plantation, later we'll speak more of that, then we lose a lot of diversity. So I think that the institutional model this institutional agroecological model has a lot to do with a simplification of the landscape. There's not much basis for saying it's agroecology. They're not including different agroecologies. It's been said that plants are harvested. The peasant is going to have resource, but analyses have been carried out that the program is going to extend to 2024. But really, there won't be harvest of the fruit of the trees until 2027 or even later. So the program may not be taking place at that time. There's no government agency that's focusing on, it's not managed by agricultural agency of government, but rather the Secretary of Well-being. So we don't think there's any plans for marketing the fruits. Most people have planted trees that are native some places, but they're not native other places. And the plants didn't arrive on time or they didn't arrive in good condition. If everything goes well, there'll be an overproduction of papaya or oranges that will lead to a decrease in costs because of excess demand. So so there hasn't been any integration of marketing.
2 minutos, Rosa. Gracias.
Productivity and lifestyle. Generation of income. One of the objectives is to generate income, and so there's a monthly salary. There's a need for strategies for income, but the government is giving the money through credit cards, which is making it Oh, and they have to take out their money from a bank where they sell things like motorcycles and TVs. So it appears that the peasants are being pushed to be consumers of these types of products. Another underlying motive, perhaps. The agroforestry systems, while they are diverse, here they've been simplified. In these schemes, the diversity is simplified. They've planted coffee without shade, or plantation where everything has to be cleared, where they don't integrate the milpa, the diversified cornfield. So these plants, sometimes they've planted coffee just by itself. So this diversity you can see in this image. We tend to think that the milpa, the diversified cornfield, is just corn, beans, and squash, but no, there's animals and a whole diversity of other crops, other different products, even mushrooms that can be produced there. So as conclusions, here's a photo of one of the government officials who's going to give the money. And we think that we have to look at the change in the concepts of food security. They're not looking at food sovereignty. We see that food sovereignty looks for agroecology, caring for land, water, seeds, and also solidarity. I hope you've been able to understand my perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rosa. And now we're going to pass on to Omar.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen, in which we will see something about these processes of co-opting agroecology by Sembrando Vida. It's incredible that a program apparently shows one face, but behind it reflects the opposite of what it could be. It shows a friendly face, planting 1 million hectares. That seems to be an excellent idea given the environmental crisis, but we see that really the opposite is happening. So we're going to share some of what we found in our research. I want to begin with the idea of the international context of agroecology that is being talked about by the FAO in Rome, where institutionality recognizes agroecology. In the past 40 years, agroecology challenged all those power structures and spaces that were looked down upon. And through the conquest by the peoples, by struggles, by peasant movements, agroecology begins to enter into institutionality, like even in agribusiness. But this is a problem because it became agroecology which is depoliticized, which is trying to adapt to technologies of agribusiness. And we've discussed this with Peter in articles. Agroecology is a territory in dispute. Governments, for some years, have begun to recognize agroecology because intensification of the environmental crisis, particularly climate change, made agroecology enter the discussion, the discourse of global governance. And increasingly more countries have designed public policy to expand agroecology. In America, Latin America is where there's been more policy, government policies related to agroecology by so-called leftist governments. In Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the president, has talked about the fourth transformation, the name of his general program. And he also included agroecology. But we consider that the institutionalization, while it's part of a conquest of social movements, it's a big risk for depoliticizing to fulfill the agenda of international capital. Social movements, particularly Via Campesina, have been critical of the cooptation of agroecology by corporations, greenwashing that they're trying to do, or show a friendly face. But there haven't been too many criticisms about this cooptation. And what we're going to hear now by members of Via Campesina is an exception to this. There are criticisms of this institutionalization of agroecology. The problem is not the institutionality of agroecology in itself, but rather these public policies so far have followed classical developmentalism, subsidies, extensionism of experts, as Rosa mentioned, that are counteracting social processes to expand agroecology in the territories. And this is a very paternalistic approach. It's very tied to electoral politics, legitimization of macro projects of investment and political discourse, organizational destructuration of territories, creation and the peasant peoples are being placed into a capitalist model. They're establishing a system of milpa, diversified cornfield, with fruit trees. It's a foreign, externally imposed model, trying to homogenize agriculture. Also, it's rural development projects based on subsidies that end up exchanging use values for exchange values, because people join the program for the subsidy, not because of a love of trees. So people aren't doing this because of conviction, but because of the money. So this incorporates, they're also incorporating the communities into structures of domination, transforming peasants who are relatively autonomy employees of the government. They employ them as planters, and they teach them to need the projects and their funds to do agroecological transformations. And they transform shifting agriculture, despoiling land. And I want to focus on, first I'll say, these effects are completely contrary to the peasant struggle and the political aims of social movements that are defending food sovereignty. And we see it as corruption and cooptation of agroecology. But first we have to understand that Sembrando Vida is is connected to macro projects of the so-called fourth transformation that seek development of the country. The most well-known now is the Mayan train, which we can see here in the Yucatan Peninsula, to connect tourist sites and with archaeological sites on the Yucatan Peninsula and extending to Chiapas. But social movements have been particularly critical, seeing that it's not talking about not just a train, it's a much broader project that includes real estate development, construction of highways, ports, airports. So the tourist mega projects that were implanted into Cancun, for example, these residential complexes with golf courses, sports areas. Now they're looking to reproduce those in a jungle area with a great diversity in all these places that will be connected by the train. Real estate developments. So there's blueprints of all these real estate developments, creating new cities in the Yucatan Peninsula. And also building ports. So this is an agro-industrial project, not just tourist project, to favor large-scale investment, to come to the territories to generate despoiling. They're also planning to develop the oil infrastructure to support all this. Also monocultures of soy and oil palm and sugarcane, sorghum, soy. And these have generated territorial disputes. And this is generating expansion of agro-industrial crops like soy. And also large-scale pig farms have been growing in the region. The train also seeks to link all these mega projects, agro-industrial mega projects. Also, so-called renewable energies, wind farms. These are all these wind and solar projects that are planned. Some of them are already in operation. They're projects of despoilment in the whole Yucatan Peninsula. So we see it, the Yucatan Peninsula is a zone of intense accumulation. And the fourth transformation seeks to develop not only the Yucatan Peninsula, also Chiapas, that we will see soon. Many of these projects coincide with communal land holdings. Many places where the train will pass are communal land holdings. So the ejidos, communal land holdings, coincide with these sections of the Mayan train in red. You can see the municipalities where the train coincides with communal land holdings. They're supposedly carrying out consultations, but there's a lot of problems with the process that they're doing that. They're threatening them to take away the subsidy if they don't cooperate, other subsidies if they don't cooperate with the projects. And technical advisors of Sembrando Vida have confirmed this. On the isthmus of Oaxaca, There's another big development plan, like another type of Panama Canal, to diversify routes of commerce between the Atlantic and the Pacific. So they're planning to invest a lot of money for highways, airports, gas pipelines, refineries, industrial parks, tax-free zones, geothermal projects. And so there's a plan to link all these projects, and this also an oil refinery in Tabasco is planned to govern a lot of the oil production in the region. This is part of the capitalist global agenda. So how can the project Sembrando Vida be part of this immense project? This project for development of the southern part of Mexico, it can't analyze it by itself. The Mayan train is connected to the Transismic corridor, and also the oil industrial development that's being planned. But you can see in green here, or gray, the municipalities of Sembrando Vida, how they coincide. They've said it's integrated into other government projects. So we see it as brainwashing to convince the peasant communities to accept these other projects. So they're making them reduce their agriculture to 2.5 hectares, as Rosa said. And this way, the state is constructing these mega projects. It's a neo-colonial reduction, or we ask, is it neo-colonial reductionism to generate land for capitalist agenda? When we listen to the technical aspects, that the trees don't come on time, really the problem is not in those technical details, but rather in this, about these mega projects. What's happening to these millions of hectares that are going to be coming out of shifting cultivation? You can see there's a process of proletarianization, as we say. The programs are treating the peoples as employees, not as autonomous communities. Apparently, to integrate them into these macro projects as accustomed to being employees. Trump's wall, he said, it's not going to be paid by the US. We think that the wall is not on the border between the US and Mexico, but this is the wall, the macro projects of capital. This coincides. We see that how Sembrando Vida coincides with these macro projects. Here's John Kerry, who's they're looking at containing migration, and they're also looking to extend this to Honduras. But we have to see all the territorial interests also in Honduras, Guatemala, and all of Central America. How these projects of Sembrando Vida can be a platform for despoilment. So what we want to put on the table is that planting trees is not the principal objective of this program.
Thank you so much, Omar. And now we're going to pass over to Gabriela, who's going to introduce La Via Campesina's part of this webinar. Sadly, we ran over a little bit because of the technical difficulties at the end. So we'll take all the questions at the end, and the panelists can also reply to questions in the Q&A as we go along. So over to you, Gabriela.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos días. ¿Me escuchan?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Do you hear me correctly? Great. Good morning to everybody. My name is Gabriela Linares Sosa. I am part of the Oaxaca, the organizations there, and I'm going to moderate this second panel that's Sembrando Vida from the Organization of the Territories. Inside this webinar, how to understand Sembrando Vida. With further ado, I'm going to present the compañeros that are part of organizations in different regions of the state of Mexico. First of all, we're going to have Álvaro Salgado. He is agriculture coordinator of the Department of Agroecology, Territory, and Communality of the National Center of Indigenous Missions, CENAMI. He accompanies from the Pastoral Indígena, different organizations from Via Campesina. Also with us, Nora Salome Secamal. She is Maya woman, part of the Guardians network of Guardians of the Seeds, and member of the organization Cacuctal Mushmeyal. And finally, Aldo González Rojas. He is part of the organization of the Juárez landscape, and he is impulsor of the indigenous rights in the north part of Oaxaca, and he participated in the San Andres Accords about indigenous culture and rights, and he has impulsed the struggle in defense of the native corn against transgenic corns. So we'll thank the people of the first panel, Omar, Peter, Rosa, for their introduction and different perspectives and forms in the way that Sembrando Vida has impacted or is impacting our country. We have talked about the change of the use of the soil, the change of the ecological structure, the loss of biodiversity, and the establishment of monoculture cultives, the degradation of soil. And in the last participation that Omar had about with the articulation of Sembrando Vida with other mega projects, especially in the southeast part of Mexico and the south part of Mexico. So all of this from a peasant viewpoint, all of these implications are there, and the most immediate impact is in the loss of food sovereignty, in which the compañeros have made their reflections. No se escucha ya, Gabriela. Sorry, I can't hear Gabriela. We lost Gabriela.
Es probable que tenga problemas con el internet.
So I think that Gabriela is having problems. So Álvaro is going to start speaking. So maybe we can start with Álvaro then. Taking into account this. Good morning, everybody. I am going to present. Can you confirm, please, if you can see this presentation? Yes, okay. Okay. What I want to do in this conversation is to point out certain adverse effects from this program, Sembrando Vida, by this itinerary, by this shifting agriculture. And this shifting agriculture is is completely different from the Sembrando Vida, from this Sembrando Vida project and the system of reforestation. So these are two completely different ways. So this would be the territory, the forestal territory, uh, jungle and forests. And we're going to see how Sembrando Vida is in all of these states and it wants to take for their own these 8,000 agrarian cores. It's 74 million hectares, 32% of the national territory. And if this public policy continues, goes from one president to the other, we will be assisting to a program that wants to reduce the population that is economically active, that lives in the country, especially in forests and jungles. This is the this is the objective of this agenda of the 2022-2030. There's a pressure that more than 30 years from this country for the jungles and the forests to convert to have service or conservation purposes. So the program Sembrando Vida, it seems that wants to continue with this, but imposes as another process of, of land holding and limitation, as Peter Mark said before. In reality, these are the problems that we see in Mexico. We see extreme poverty, food poverty, seen from this economic viewpoint of the country. And at the same time, we have these areas of conservation where the indigenous people are the protagonists of these lands, but from other systems of agriculture that are not those that Sembrando Vida wants to impose. So in those same territories, they want to impose dynamics that are neoliberal, that are intact as extractivism, mega projects, mining extractivism, exploitation, non-commercial exploitation of oil. So there's a contradiction in programs, in the laws and the public policies, because we are living in the same territory, these two dynamics, the extractivism and the Sembrando Vida. So the rural communities in Mexico, including those that are part of jungles and forests, they have a lot of problems like extractivism, forced displacement, forest fires, and another things. And we are in a historic moment where the property of the land, also promoted by the government, is another way of parting land. And there's also dynamic of conservatism. So Sembrando Vida is in an ideal world and is not responding to the contradictions that exist in the rural communities. We think that the affectations that are being with, where we have talked with a lot of communities in the country, is that they're a different part of degradation and erosion of land, even those that are under MIAF program. So there's a discontinuity of the communitarian model, of an ecological and territorial model, because the operation rules impose another mechanism to understand the use and the relationship with the earth. There is a community breakdown because there doesn't have to, the decisions don't pass through the assemblies, they just come through. And also the destiny of the territory as communitary territory is being changed. So if certain programs haven't achieved to dismantle the social tissue, this modification of land and the relationship with the land will achieve to impact negatively this social tissue, this agrarian tissue. And also this is very in this exclusion and prevention of the cultural sense that they give to the common work that is organized, and putting as this conditionment of money to be able to participate, and the activities are put by the technicians that are external, and they break with this work, that the work is not proletarized work. Now it's a work as force, not as being in a job. So this use of job is the base of the autonomy and predetermination of the original people. So we see two schemes of the land. The one is that is white. We see these plots. Only agriculture that have 2.5 hectares can enter, and in the other system, they pretend to include a social inclusion, communitary inclusion. So these are like the two models, Sembrando Vida and the indigenous ones. So the rules of the operation of Sembrando Vida, they contradict the objectives of the program that are productive inclusion, taking care of the environment, trying to save money and reconstruct the social tissue. But the practices, they affect the territory. In practice, it affects the territory, and it's not a savings culture that's being about, because the people are being employed and given money to pay and not to save their money. And it breaks with social tissue because it does not include all the people in the community. We said this, no? The inclusion versus exclusion. The exclusion of Sembrando Vida, it's only 2.5 hectares. It doesn't have to do with a community process. You just have to have a land. It doesn't have to be with consensus or assembly. People of shifting agricultures cannot go in. They say that explicitly. People that do shifting in agriculture are excluded from the program, and there's such a limitation of this process, and it is directed externally by the technicians of Sembrando Vida. And in the other hand, in the shifting agriculture, as Peter said, it is a territorial dynamic that is family, communitary, and that has to do with they have to choose the place and the scale. It doesn't matter like the amount of agricultural job they want to do. It has to do with the knowledge of the ancestral practices of the indigenous people. They don't need nobody external to tell them how to work. And it's a factor of community integration. And most importantly, it's the reproduction of their identities and culturally and religiously. And this is a census of 1993, and that is available for the states that are with this surface of shifting agriculture are like 7,000 hectares, and it is the basis of the survival of the communities. Right now, the communities are in defending their territory for these extractivism models that are coming towards them, and the crisis and the climate crisis. And it seems like Sembrando Vida is in another context, like another country or another world. That the only thing that is lacking is knowledge and money, but it really is not responding to reality that the people and the indigenous populations are having in their territories. As we see, these are the states that are in the program Sembrando Vida, and these are the areas where the shifting agriculture are being practices. There is a clear intention to eliminate this kind of agriculture that is more than 1 million agricultures and that have like 7 million hectares, and they have this rest periods of 7 or 8 or more years, and they pretend this way with the money of Sembrando Vida and the use of this money to make uh, a new grabbing of the territories of the indigenous people. So Peter said this again about the shifting agriculture in the world. I'm not going to stop a lot of this, but it is a way of being in the land. It is a cultural identity that have preserved forests and vegetables and other kinds of plantings. This is what Peter said about the temporary occupation of the place. These are the periods of rest, and then for the land to recover. This has a lot to do with the cosmovision and the interpretations that the communities ancestrally have over the land. They have to ask for permission and and say sorry and leave the Mother Earth to reconstitute and recover itself. So Sembrando Vida breaks with this completely. So this is the place, all the process to be able to occupy our place. Plot, it's a millenary agriculture that has to do cultural sense. This system makes the people, makes the territory. Here's a comparison of how there is a way of seeing the shifting agriculture as a problem, but in reality, it is a solution. For example, the erosion is almost invisible, and there's much more carbon capture with this shifting agriculture. There is a limitant in the MIAP that they can use plots with this kind of angles because it is very complex. And in the final considerations, if the program wants to, they want that for the people to stop doing shifting agriculture. If that is their objective, well, there will be a great pressure over traditional systems and cultural systems to do agriculture that make territory, that make community. It can also imply new plots of the territory, of the communal plots in open territories and not closed. This is the origin of capitalism in Europe, and they want to do this grab of the land and the reforestation through this social program, because a lot of these parts would stop being secondary vegetables, and it would limit and change the use of the land. So the program Sembrando Vida, it has adverse effects in the culture and the territory of these communities. We hope that a lot of people are going out of the program because they are not accepting to being directed by these technicians that are external, and there's a lot of things that are not going great, and there's a lot of closure to this to give information to be able to make more serious analysis. So thank you very much for your attention. Bye. Thank you, Álvaro. I am going to give the word to Rosset, only to comment that you have 12 minutes, and also for those who are accompanying us, they can put their questions in the chat, and they're going to respond in the moment. Go ahead, Nora. Before everything, good day to everybody. We're going to share a little bit that we have constructed from the organization Pastoral. And with all this information that we have been hearing and sharing from this morning, from earlier on, we can see that we are in front of a new colonization. And the most worrying part of all of this is this situation and this menace is against the indigenous people in the south of Mexico. Ahorita la cojo.
En el PowerPoint abajo donde estaba la flecha hace un momento. Ahí.
Ya, ok, ya está. Gracias, Peter. Bueno, entonces,
so what we are seeing in this moment is a series of menace to the communal life, to the systems of production of feeding in the south of Mexico, of food and agriculture in the south of Mexico. I would also like to wait. Okay, I think I would like to take again the origin of the myth of creation of our Maya people, where from Popol Vuh, they remind us that we are diverse, that we are made of corn, And that's this creation of the cosmos and the birth of the human being starts and has its origins in the corn. So this is very important to talk about for us, for the original people, the corn inside of, of the corn fields is very important. Not only in the fact that it's what we eat, but also from the cosmovision, the way for our way of seeing and how we relate through the cornfields. I would also like to comment that all of this has been transmitting from generation to generation and makes us see that this way of production has some characteristics that are very particular. It's not only the corn. There is a series of relationships that are being existing there through the planting. So in the cornfield, we have a lot of diversity of a lot of different plants, and these cultivations are defined through time and are related to the decisions of the families and of the community from what is to plant and how to plant, what to plant, how to plant, and when to plant it. So each family defines their own necessities, and they cover those fooding necessities through the seeds that it plants, and they rescue and conserve and define little by little. And it is also important to say that this function, being the cornfield in its totality, and not only that it is food, there's also a cultural function that it fulfills that we can find inside of this cornfield. And there's a transmission of knowledges that are very diverse, that are related to the cycles of production, but also to the ground, to the soil, to gastronomy, to the same spirituality of the people, where there is a series of values and that there's also collective work being done. And this respect to corn, to the seeds, to the native seeds, and this relationship that we conceive with Mother Earth is there. And also this diversity of medicine, of plants, of animals, that they can sustain the farming life. So this relationship that we have with the cornfield is not only, and we can not only see it in what the cornfield produces, but also in those knowledges that are being transmitted from generation to generation. And the space of the cornfield is a space that is also of learning and of educational, that they transmit this knowledge and they sustain life. So what we have heard in the presentations, in the previous presentations, confirms what we have been reflecting from the organization, because this program is attempting against this farming production system that gives life to the indigenous people, and it breaks these ways of relating in a communitary way, where these knowledges and this transmission from generation to generation is not being produced in this way of dismantling this way in which there is individualism from the Sembrando Vida program. Thinking about this productive farming system that breaks with what the compañeros have already said by breaking this shifting cycle. So this program is also trying, Sembrando Vida, to homogenize the cornfield wanted it to be a MIAP system where we know that the cornfield, the milpa, there's not only one type, there's a diversity of cornfield in function to the characteristics of the soil and of the seeds that in each place are given. And what we think is even worse is this perspective of seeing the benefits very in short term and looking only these economic benefits. And we do see that the risk is that we lose this long-term vision, we won't see the consequences that are going to come in the next years. So there is a historical breaking of the farming people, very, very, very difficult situation, and the capitalism is against this indigenous people and organizations, and Álvaro also makes this very visible when we see that the states of the Peninsula Yucatan, Campeche, Yucatan, all the south part of Mexico is being sustained, their life is sustained by the peasant life in relation to the farm field. So we can also see that this is a program that is constructed from above, where the original people, or the peoples, are not having any type of power over their territory. There's no governance. And it breaks with this way of decision making, and especially with the food sovereignty that is being vulnerable and being attacked with this program. We can also see that when we focus, when there is a focus to certain cultivations, that's what this program does, makes that the seeds are displaced, certain seeds are displaced, and not only the seeds is what's being in risk, but all of this of knowledges that are around the cornfield and its practice. There's not only this vulnerabilization to the relationships and the cultivation and all of this farm work, we see that this program is also taking out from roots that permits the life of the original people, for them to lose not only food sovereignty, but also their capacity to resist to all of these attacks because of the problematic that we are living in the south of Mexico. These changes that are being brought, and in general, all of these knowledges through the cultivation that have been planting from a lot of generations behind. It is very sad to see that this economic benefit, is more important, and that there's a lot of loss of knowledges that are being that are at risk when losing the cornfield. And we do coincide that this program is seeking we think that one of the objectives is prioritization of the farmers and this clientelism, and especially in these places where they're being implemented, these mega projects. What we have seen is a region, and in this last electoral process that we lived here in the peninsula with the changing of government, we saw that it was a very important flag to be able to co-optate and guarantee not only certain people entering power that came out of all these scenario of Sembrando Vida, but they want to validate through Sembrando Vida a series of situations that are being lived in the peninsula. And thank you very much. Thank you, Nora. They give us a view through Campeche, through the peninsula, and we are thankful for her word and going to listen to the compañero Aldo González from Oaxaca. Go ahead, Aldo. Good afternoon, good day, good afternoon from Mexico to all the people that are listening to us on this occasion. My name is Aldo González. I am from the Union of Organizations of Juárez. I wanted to put here some preoccupations that are being put out there from the perspective of indigenous people. I think that the main preoccupation is that this program attacks the self-determination of the indigenous people. The program has its own rules of operation, and even though in the first moment, for example, the communities here in this part of Oaxaca, they try to incite or to be part of this secretary for the rules of operations to change and for them to adapt or adopt one of the principles as the predetermination of the indigenous people. This wasn't possible. So what they achieved, the community in the second year, the communities of Oaxaca, because Oaxaca entered in the second year of the program, is that the initial rule that said that the farmers had to have 2.5 hectares of land for them to go into the program. That rule could, and in the change, that could change. So they permitted them to have different plots, and that summing them up could have 2.5 hectares. So technically, the program of cornfields with fruit trees requires, according to the technicians, of 2.5 hectares, continuous hectares, but it is almost impossible here in this territory. But this was modified. But that is one of the few things that they achieved, and they could modify the farmers, because the organizations here were pressuring a lot, and there was also certain negativity through the community to try to bring about a 2.5 hectare land, because in this part it's almost impossible, because they're like a fourth of hectare what they use to plant the cornfields. So with all of the good things that could have this idea of planting cornfields and fruit trees, it is a colonial way of doing. It was decided unilaterally without respecting the indigenous people's customs, and there's other mechanisms of control that are part of the program that maybe in other countries have been naturalized because of the adoption through very years of the technologies of communication and information, but that in the indigenous populations, the feeling towards this mechanism of control is different. So we could say that we feel invaded when the plots are geo-referenced. And for why do they geo-reference these plots? And they say because they are monitored by satellites. So we feel like we are under vigilance, because by the satellite we can see that if it was burned, it wasn't burned, if the reforestation continues or not, or so there are mechanisms of control that escape from the human presence and that take us to a dynamic of control that is almost robotized. And this is practically new in the communities, indigenous communities of this region, and is not well seen. So a very important problem for the indigenous peoples is that they give attention to the people of the communities as poor and not as indigenous. So the indigenous communities have been impoverished through the last 500 years. That is a very old discourse. But in the last years, since this neoliberal system is implemented, they reduce the money that they give to the farming, especially in the countries that are not developed. This word of development that motivates other type of reflection. But this has provoked more impoverishing of the indigenous population and imposed migration. That is why a lot of people in the communities are more than 50 years old. And the population in Juárez, Oaxaca, Juárez, has reduced the young population in the last 30 years because of the migration. And the program puts emphasis that it attends poor farmers. It doesn't take into account the different uh, the cultural difference of a farmer that is mestizo or indigenous farmer that takes the decisions in community and has the land in a communal way. So from a mestizo that has it individually, so it's very different. And the program says that the indigenous doesn't know how to organize themselves, and they put in this learning processes that break um, the indigenous ways of life. For example, the assembly, that the way they take positions, and these positions are obligatory for all of the participants of the community. And with the program, the decisions that they make in those groups, they only make them with the institutions and the participants of the program. Other of the institutions, communitary institutions that have permitted the communities to survive is Vecchio, that is a collective work that is for benefit for all of the community, that it is convoked by the authority and where everybody participates, all of the participants of the community participate. And this has been eroded because the program wants the full time of the farmers that are participating. Also, the indigenous families organize amongst themselves to resolve their problems with their families and with their friends, especially to resolve the necessity of producing food, as um, the cornfield that is at least bean, calabaza, and corn. And they also use these forms of family organizations to clean up the cornfield. And in this process, they clean up the land and in the traditional ways of cultivation. And they also use this kind of work for the harvesting. So the company of the family and friends is very important. This is being broken with Sembrando Vida. These ways of organization have names in the indigenous language. In Zapoteco, it's called the pulum. That is a way of exchanging work. But also it can be used with other objectives, like support young people to do their houses when they are starting their family life, and also to exchange supports along the way in life. But for example, when there's a marriage and peace, and there's an exchange not of presents, but there's an exchange. Maybe they give them guajolotes or a different or animals that they're going to use for the party. But when the one that is giving this gift needs something, they will give them to them. This forms of organization, there is not the money to resolve some unexpected problems, so they receive support from the whole community. So this is a way of life, and this way of life is being eroded with the program Sembrando Vida because there is no time to live the life in community. Added to this, the program defines the agricultural techniques that have to be used and limits and refuses traditional techniques of agroecology. With the system of shifting agriculture, the system cannot be used, and this system has to do with putting the cornfield after putting fire to a certain part of the plot. And this is not well seen, so that is why this is being like rejected to use, and they say that the jungle or the forest cannot be burned down. But this system is the one that has guaranteed the existence of a lot of jungles or forests because they leave the place that they burn, and they use wild for it to recover. So that plot is abandoned to be able to recover from the planting, and in there is a regeneration that's going to be there. So the farmer comes years after to occupy that plot, It rests like 6 years at least, even though there are others that can have like 80 years of rest. It depends for the territorial extension of the community, amongst other things. So in this region of the Sierra Juárez in Oaxaca, we can say that the max, the most that can be planted is 3 hectares, even though people use generally 1 hectare to produce their food. The testimony of a farmer of the community says, we told the technicians that we can use the shifting agriculture system, but they only accepted a way in that we don't burn everything. In Zapoteco, it's called uyuyu, that it is putting all you put all in a place and then you burn it. But you can practice the complete system of shifting agriculture. That whereas it's burned to be able to plant the corn here and then leave it to rest. And 5, 10 years after it comes about so so the program wants the cornfield to be sedentary and have only this intercalating with the fruit trees. And it's practically impossible in this part of in the territory. A farmer from this community says, it says, people and from Chapingo had come here and want to establish this MIAP system in our land, but we see that this doesn't work here. It doesn't work because when we plant these seeds, it produces a lot of it doesn't let the cornfield grow because of the shadow that these trees produce. They also have been doing seed seeds in exchange, and these are another way of extractivism that communities have saved during so much time. An important preoccupation is also that the people that have been participating have been felt abandoned by the government. Like now they are receiving a governmental support. It seems like a favor that they haven't received ever, even though it is a lot of job to do all of the activities that they are planning. So a lot of them feel that like uh, grateful, and they do not want to criticize uh, to Andres Manuel López Obrador because they feel that it's the first time that they are being supported. And this is causes like another tension because the social programs are used to cooptate people, and the preoccupation it grows because most of the communities that are selected from this program in this region are menaced or for uh, from one or more mega projects that want to be realized and done in this area. Here is a super highway, the establishment of hydroelectric in the river and the Rio Grande, and also a lot of mining concessions. The Cajones River, then it's Texechuacan, and then Papaluapan, when it arrives to the Gulf of Mexico, it's a live river because it doesn't have obstacles provoked by the human being from the sea to the mountain of Sembrando. That is one of the highest mountains where the water starts, begins, and it is a source of culture and natural resource, and that is inquantifiable. And these social programs want to impose these mega projects through these, these beautiful river that is the Cajon River. And we think that this is a natural paradise that can be converted to an uh, environmental infernus, as another regions of Oaxaca is happening where they have imposed their development. So we're going to defend the land. Thank you. Thank you, Alvaro, very much. We appreciate the participation of Álvaro Salgado, Nora Sek, and Aldo Gonzalez from this second panel. And we are going to give Emma back the word that she is going to close up this activity. Thank you very much for accompanying us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gabriela, and everyone from La Via Campesina for repairing the time that we went over with all the technical problems. And you took us back. So, but we unfortunately do not have time for a question and answer session. Because of this, then everyone's tried very hard to answer the questions in the chat. Hopefully we did get through all the questions in the chat. If you have any more questions, you can direct them to us by email and we can maybe continue the conversation that way. We will also send a video of the event out via Eventbrite to everyone that came. So I would just like to say thank you so much to everyone that came along, everyone in the audience for all the intelligent and interesting questions. I'd like to give a huge thanks to Rosa and Anna who did the interpretation, which was fantastic, thank you. To all the panelists, and also to mention Kate and Julia and Anna and Alberto, who have also been involved in this project but have not presented today. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you so much to all the panelists. And